All right, so we're back here on the grade of the Port Arthur, Duluth, and Western. We are here for yet another little exploration. So today brings us to Stanley, which is located at milepost 19 on the railway. And so here we are facing to the east, and you can see the former grade here, which is now known as Hearthstone Road, as it stretches to the east here in front of us. And so if we pan this way, we can see kind of what remains of this little village. And so just to give you a little history of this point, so Stanley was the first major point outside of the cities of Port Arthur and Fort William that the railway reached, and that happened in late 1889. The name of this particular place had just been given to it. In September of 1889, this particular spot was visited by the Governor General of Canada, Lord Stanley of Preston. And so they decided to adopt his name as the name of the village. And some of you might recognize the name Lord Stanley of Preston. 4 years later, he donated a trophy, which today is known as the Stanley Cup. So that is the same individual associated with the National Hockey League. So this was one of the original stations on the railway until things began to change in 1899. And so that was the year that construction began on the Canadian Northern Railway, which built a new line from Port Arthur through Stanley to Atikokan and Fort Frances, through Minnesota, and then on to Winnipeg. And it was decided that Stanley would be the junction point between the two lines. And so this is where the old Port Arthur, Duluth, and Western Railway, eventually becoming the Duluth extension of the Canadian Northern Railway, and the main line to Winnipeg would split. And so the Port Arthur, Duluth, and Western continued straight down the road that you see in front of us, and then the Canadian Northern would start working its way westward and then eventually northward to Kakabeka. And so we're standing here right at the junction of Hearthstone Road and Highway 588, and so you can see a few prominent features just across, diagonally across the intersection here would have been where the station would have been located, and just over here, just to the north side, would have been the location of the water tank. And so we're going to hop across the road and take a look over there. Okay, so we're over here on the west side of the road now, and we're going to take a look at things from here. So there's a couple things to point out. So first of all, this area right here, as we pan to the south, would have been the location of the station here at Stanley. And so the original station here was built when the railway was built. It was a framed building that was about 50 feet by 25 feet. And then over here, you can hear some running water. So this would have been the location of the tank here at Stanley. And so the water tank was built around the same time that the railway was built, so probably dating back to 1889. And so for many, many years, this was reputed to be some of the best water in the area. It's fed by a stream. Actually, back in the early 1900s, there was a typhoid outbreak in Fort William, and some of the water that was used to replace the local city water came from this spring-fed stream. So as we take a look down here, you can actually see what looks like to be some concrete pieces down here. I don't know if this is part of the original bridge structure that was here, or it could be part of the water tank that was here. There appears to be, if we work our way a little bit further down here, there appears to be the remains of what looks to be like a pile. So you can see a timber right here, and I don't know if that's part of the original structure here. You can see the concrete piece just across on the other side of the stream. And there's more concrete right here. And so as we make our way back up to the road. So again, this was built on top of the grade, and so again, this was the divergent point between the Port Arthur, Duluth, and Western, which ran straight down this road on its way to the bridge over the Kaministiquia River about a mile away, and the main line would have started splitting off to the right and started working its way uphill on its way to Kakabeka. Now, Stanley remained the junction up until 1912. Starting in 1909, Canadian Northern decided that it was time to replace this section of track between Stanley and Kakabeka on the main line because of the grade. It is affectionately known as high track. It has a very, very steep grade coming down into Stanley. And so they built a new section of line about 7 miles to the east near Roslyn. And that new point became known as Twin City Junction. And so when the new cutoff piece of track was completed in 1912, the trains now split at Twin City, and Stanley was no longer the junction. And so obviously its importance declined considerably, and there wasn't as much activity here as there was when it was the principal junction. And the trains continued to roll through here until 1938, when the line was abandoned and the rails were removed. So I hope you've enjoyed today's exploration, and we're going to be back probably next week, and we're going to be taking a look at that mainline track that heads up to Kakabeka called High Track.